Good morning.
Hello.
Morning, everyone. Am I a little obvious? I ought to be. I'm the president of the Toronto Community Foundation. That's the foundation for people who love Toronto and want to make it great. So you shouldn't be surprised. Oh, there we go. Now you know what we're all about. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes this morning tying a story from Toronto into what's going to happen in 2017. Now you can tell I love Toronto. Now there's a reason for that though. At our foundation, every year we do a report. It's called the Toronto's Vital Signs Report, and I'm sure many of you have seen that before. What did it say about us this year? It said, Toronto, how are we doing? Not too bad. It said we're safe, we're sound, but guess what? We are struggling a little bit. Let's take the sound for a second. So Toronto, again, at the top of the list amongst national cities across the world. Number 4 in livability, according to The Economist magazine. That's pretty good. But did you know that 3 out of the 5 top cities on the planet were Canadian? That's fantastic. Think about it. If that was sports, we'd have 3 out of the top 5 on the first all-star team on the planet. That's good stuff, and that's something to build off of. So we're sound. We're safe. This is important because everybody says to me, okay, what's the big aha moment this year? Safety. Look, we got a lot of issues on the streets, and they're very disturbing. But on a net basis, crime's down about 30+% over the last half dozen years. We've got one of the safest cities, not only in Canada, but in North America and amongst large cities. And that's something to be really proud of. But we're struggling. I want to touch on that for a second. 43% of our fellow citizens in the city of Toronto are currently living in low or very low income neighborhoods. Now think of that and do the math. That's over 1 million people, 2/3 of whom are visible minorities. Now simply stated, that's got to change. And that's the theme, change. Change in Toronto. How do we manage that? Let's think about it for a second. About 25% of the population of Toronto arrived here over the last 25 to 30 years. That's a lot of change to absorb. Now let's go out the next 25 to 30 years. What's it going to look like? Well, we've got the equivalent of the city of Montreal is going to move into the GTA. That's pretty big. We're going to have more seniors than youth in the GTA. And in the city of Toronto alone, we're going to have close to 80% of our population will either be immigrant or children of immigrants. Wow, is that a lot of change to absorb? What is going to guide us to build a better city? And how does that inform what we could think about in terms of building a better nation? Think about this. You know that number I gave you of 43%? Well, by 2025, 60% of all neighborhoods in the city of Toronto will be low or very low income neighborhoods. That's way beyond a tipping point. That's unacceptable. But remember that this whole process has in fact taken place in a time when Toronto has had extraordinary prosperity over the last 40 years. Prosperity. That's an important thing to think about. But it dawned on us as we looked at this year's Toronto's Vital Signs that prosperity, albeit a really good thing, maybe that's not the ultimate goal. Maybe it's actually the penultimate goal. So then what is the ultimate goal? How about happiness? Happiness. Don't laugh, it's a very serious matter these days. Going back to Bhutan in 1972. Now it's over to Jeffrey Sachs and all the big-time economists, and it's made its way into the United Nations. Happiness could be the focal point. So, how can Toronto actually inform the rest of the country on how to build a happy city? Well, we thought about that too, and we said, well, listen, in Toronto, a happy city can be a city that moves, a city that works, and a city that lives. I'm going to explain those a little bit because each one has actually got a two-parter to it. The city that moves. No kidding. Transit. It's a big issue in this city. We're doing something about it finally. It's the circulatory system for our city and our region. It's starting to move. It's happening. Everybody else should do the same thing. City that moves in a slightly different way. And that is a city that moves other cities to a higher level of leadership. And this is what I'm driving at. Toronto, in many ways, is the petri dish for globalization, right? The planet exists here in our region. And last year, when we talked about vital signs, we said the world needs Toronto to succeed. And we can extend that and say the world needs Canada to succeed. Why? Because we're doing something very special here. And in Toronto, how we work with diversity, it's not perfect. But boy, it's a whole lot better than everybody else is doing in some struggling places. That is a position of leadership we need to respect and honor. And we can actually invest in that as leaders to move other cities to better places. How about the city that works? Okay, we live in Toronto. We have our foibles here. But guess what? By and large, it works pretty darn well. You don't get to be the 4th best city on the planet if you don't work well. Other cities around the world would love to have our institutions. So it works okay. The other side, the one you think about when we talk about work, labor. Well, guess what? Newcomers have built this city back into the 1700s. And that's our future going forward as well. So we need to be able to retain the best and the brightest, get them to come to Toronto and the region, and Canada, of course, to help build it out future. And we need to invest in that. And that's a part of building a happy city. We talked about happy city being a city that lives, and there are 2 parts to that. You can't build a happy city that lives if it's not committed to sustainability. And we're starting to do something about that in Toronto, and that's really good. We're looking at fewer smog days, green roofs. We've got to worry about the water, but we're doing something about that. Sustainability is key. The last part about a city that lives, hey, a city that lives is a city that knows how to live it up. And we know how to do that in Toronto, from Luminato to all of the other festivals we have in town, to our museums. And we have got the best film festival on the planet. And we need to remind ourselves that stuff makes us happy. And we need to continue to invest in that. And that's a model that we can share across the country as well. So we can actually build a happy city. But you know what underlines all of that, though? It all comes together and only happens if we have one really special ingredient. And that's trust. Trust holds it all together. Trust in our institutions, in our leadership, in our neighborhoods, and with each other. Trust is absolutely key. Now, the academics call that social capital, right? Social, I like social. Capital, not such a bad thing. Social capital is what binds us together and helps build that trust. I'm going to tell you a little story about what social capital means to me, and maybe that's going to give us a chance to understand how, as a nation, we can do something about building social capital. So the story is about a little boy. The little boy goes from London, England to London, Ontario in 1968. It's a little South Asian boy about this big, and I know him really well because it was me. So I went to London, England in 1968. And if you know anything about, London, Ontario, I moved there. If you know anything about London, Ontario, a great place to grow up, a beautiful city, not a bastion of multiculturalism, especially in 1968. So there, a only child, little South Asian boy, shows up late in the summer, ready to go to school, 1968. And guess what? It's Hockey Central. The Leafs just won the cup. And I show up there into this place where hockey is a religion. So it's one summer afternoon, late in the summer, and I'm in our apartment with my parents, and I'm getting in my mother's hair. And she says, listen, get out of the house. There's a bunch of kids over there playing street hockey. Get out and go play with them. Now, if you know anything about my mother, I'm way more scared of her than I ever could be of the kids outside. So what do? I go and I grab a hockey stick that's in the closet that came, coincidentally, with the apartment. Pick it up, and I run across the street. And let me be generous when I say I was the most tanned individual they'd seen that summer. And I show up in a parking lot, and there are a bunch of kids, and they're all playing street hockey. And if you know anything about street hockey and how you choose the teams, it works like this. Everybody throws their stick in a big pile. Then you get the alpha males that come along that are about 12 years old at that time and pick up a stick, one to the right, one to the left, and you keep on doing that until you've got 2 piles, so 2 teams. So everybody runs and scrambles and picks up their stick, except me. I'm the little one, I'm the dark one. I'm looking at it, and I'm just wondering what to do. Then one of the kids comes running over, and he stands over my stick, And he looks at me and he says, "Hey, you." I froze. I got really worried. What's going to happen? And I can see it through the eyes of a little kid right now. I had butterflies. What's going to happen now? Then the most remarkable thing happened. He looked down, looked up, and he says, "Hey, you're on our team. Let's get going." And he cracked a smile. And I say, that's the moment I became a Canadian. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a social capital moment. That's when the journey of belonging starts. That's when you start to build trust in your community. So, here's the challenge, not only to Toronto, but to the rest of the country. Can we all commit to building more of those social capital moments? Can we go into our communities and build social capital moments? Because I guarantee you that if we commit to doing that, and I challenge you and I dare you all to find that moment, go into your community, and help create social capital moments, that's how not only can we build a stronger Toronto, but Toronto could be a leader in helping to build a stronger nation for 2017. Thanks for your time this morning.